push the button whether it's going to come on or not. And so before I got started and didn't realize there wasn't anything behind me, that might be a little bit embarrassing. It's certainly good to have the opportunity to present this lesson, which is the first of the series of 3 lessons in, of course, March, April, and May, the third Sunday night. We did this last year, and of course, different topics and different ideas. And so I'm hoping that you'll schedule your time, that you can come back in April and May on the third Sunday night and see 2 more lessons as we look at 2 more of God's creation from the world of insects. And tonight's lesson, while it's not quite in the insect family, it's what we would call a bug in that class. That's close enough. There are certainly some tremendous lessons that we can learn about God's creation and about the fact that it's impossible for these things to have come about any other way other than a designer who specifically knew what those animals were going to need in order to be able to do what they're capable of doing. We'll be looking at the bombardier beetle, which is an amazing story in and of itself, and then the other lesson will be about the zombie maker, which is a wasp that literally can produce a zombie out of another organism. And so we invite you to plan to come back and to hear these series of lessons. Want to go fairly quickly into tonight's lesson. As I've started digging into this material, the one thing I realized very quickly was, ain't no way that I'm going to cover this. And so there are simply too many amazing things that God designed in something as small as an ant. And of course, we know Brother Mike started the I was had me a little worried this morning whenever he used my scripture and started with the material. And like I said, I started to sweat bullets for a few minutes and realized he was going somewhere else, which worked out fine. So tonight we want to look at ants as God's design workers, and certainly there's undoubtedly no question that God, when He created these tiny creatures that we call ants, or that He called ants, through Solomon, as he wrote the book of Proverbs, that we can see that He created some amazing creatures. Of course, Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6, go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise. And so that Mike covered the sluggard part of that this morning. And so we're going to go to the ant and look at some of the things and the ways that they operate. And hopefully we'll get a little bit of wisdom that we can use to say, let's flip these lights off, maybe that'll help a little bit. We're a little bit worried about the brightness of the bulbs and how it might affect the data projector, so I think we'll be all right. But as we look at this group of animals, the ants, and consider how they operate, consider how they live, consider what they're capable of, to say that these could come about over millions and millions of years of random accidents that the organic evolutionists and the atheists of the world want us to believe is just stretching the imagination almost to the breaking point. But again, I'll have to say, in defense of the evolutionary biologists of the world, it doesn't matter how ridiculous it sounds, they're going to believe it as long as it excludes God from the picture. As long as God is not involved, they will believe anything. Give them enough time and anything can happen. Miracles can happen. And so, Tom's the hero of the evolutionary story. And so, of course, we know that God created all things in the beginning in 6 days, with 6 days of creation. And so the ants were in that group of organisms. And so we're going to go to the ant and be wise. Now, if you look at an ant, I realize that some of you may have had bad experiences with ants. If you've ever had ants in your kitchen, you're probably having a bad experience with them. Because, Gene over there, yeah, I've done that. They can be a nuisance. and be difficult to get rid of. And not only can they be a nuisance, but they can literally destroy your structure. The carpenter ants, which are capable of eating wood, can literally eat your house from the inside out. And you'll never know what's happening until you push on the wall falls over, or something else happens, and a carpenter says, remodeling and doing something, you've got some serious, ant problems here, and the carpenter ants have taken over. But we can look at something as simple as an ant and realize that the way it's created, the way it's designed, shows that there had to be a designer who knew exactly what was going to be necessary. Ants, of course, are social insects, and I'm losing part of my formatting on some of this. One of the problems of using two different computers, sometimes you get different formatting. But they live together in something called a formicary, which of course is what we would call an anthill. They operate in a system, a caste system. They have a queen, which of course has only the function of laying eggs, reproducing, and that's her only job. Then there are males, and then there are workers, which are caregivers, they're food gatherers, they're defenders. They just sort of do whatever the formicary needs for them to do. And so that caste system, and it's even more amazing when there are 2 or 3 million of them in an anthill, to realize that somehow they're communicating with one another. Somehow they know their role. Somehow they know their job. They know what they're responsible for and go about to take care of that. The largest anthill that's ever been, or nest, the formicary that's ever been known, ever been discovered, was more than 3,700 miles long. Now, the way they determined that, because it may not have been connected, but because it had the same DNA and biochemical markers, they were identical. They checked this anthill, and in some cases they found that they were connected, and checked another one, and they were finding the exact same species of ant, the same subspecies of ant, and they were finding the same biochemical markers, which says these ants were all basically in the same nest, or in the same group. And so certainly, when you think about an organism that can survive and spread out that far, 3,700 miles, it certainly stretches the imagination. Ants have been found on every continent of the earth except for Antarctica. And of course, that simply would be too cold for them to be able to survive as they are cold-blooded. But certainly we know that ants are amazing creatures, and obviously have been designed to be able to live in, well, we're going to look at least one example of ants that live in an environment that, if God had not designed them exactly with the abilities that they have and the way their bodies are designed, they, like most other animals that live in that environment, would die very quickly. So we go to the ant and look at the fact that ants are extraordinarily strong. Now, this number of 5,000 times its own weight, you can find numbers everything from 50 times their own weight up to 5,000 times their own weight, and I found at least 2 research papers that went through the math, and so I'm just going to put that up there. We know they're exceptionally strong. Their abilities, for their weight, and you don't have to watch ants in your garden or around very long to see them pick up things that, well, for us, it would be like going out here and picking up one of these vehicles and just moving it out of the way and setting it down, or picking it up and carrying it. Because ants are certainly capable of carrying objects, and if you remember the second slide, I didn't point that out, where we saw the leaf cutter ants carrying these great big chunks of leaves that they had cut off. Many times those are much heavier than they themselves weigh, and so they are extremely strong creatures for, well, their size. And again, if you scaled them up, we would be in serious trouble, because they could rule the world with their strength. Ants, a particular ant trapjaw ant sets the world's speed record, the fastest motion by any animal. Now we know that peregrine falcons, can fly 100 miles an hour. We know that there are other organisms that are very quick. The trapjaw ant can close its jaws, its pincers, at 140 miles per hour. Now that's pretty quick, all right? To imagine that, if it's got its jaws open and you can see that's the trapjaw ant there, that it's got its jaws open, and its method of eating, of getting food, is to wait till a prey gets in front of it, and then at 140 miles an hour it can close its jaws and trap that food item, which in and of itself, imagine anything moving at 140 miles an hour is pretty hard to conceptualize that something that's that small can move that fast, and yet is still capable of showing amazing strength for its size to allow it to do what it needs to do. The safari ant, and we talk about the carpenter ant being able to destroy, wood in our homes. Well, the safari ant is mainly in South America and parts of rainforest in Africa, is capable, a colony of safari ants could, in 24 hours, completely take all of the flesh off of a human down to the skeleton. They can disassemble, literally, eat you within 24 hours, completely take all the flesh off the bones, make you a skeleton in 24 hours. Now, several million individuals, but that's still a pretty impressive feat for something that is that small. And again, we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about how they would find you, how the ants would communicate. Okay, Dave's laying over there, folks, 30 feet away. That's where you can find him. Let's go, don't have much meat on those bones, but that's where he's at. All right, well, I'm getting more meat as I get older, but that's another story. All right, so the safari ant, has a group of organisms, and you can look at the pincers here on the head of that ant and realize that it would take several of them, absolutely, but they are capable of reducing a human to a skeleton within 24 hours. Well, most ants don't have ears, and some ants do not even have eyes. And yet they're capable of making noise, and they're capable of feeling vibrations. So the ability that God has given these ants, who, again, without ears, you think, well, how in the world do you hear? If you don't have eyes, how can you see? And some of the army ants of Brazil, of the rainforest in South America, are capable, even though all of the workers are blind, to communicate with one another where the food cache, where the store of food that they have found, where it's located, and they're able to find their way, and we'll talk about how that happens. And so, again, now, there are ants obviously with eyes, and there are ants that, no ants have ears. That's universal. But they still all have the ability to feel sound, and of course humans have started to learn that people that are deaf can tell what you're saying, if they've been trained by holding their hand on your throat and feeling the vibrations and interpret those vibrations to the sound, the words that you're making. And so, humans are capable of that, but ants are designed this way, and that's how they function. Well, the ant's brain, while it isn't very big, its brain can't be very large. It's made up of about 250,000 brain cells, according to those people that, they got nothing better to do but figure out how big an ant's brain is. But it's not very big because, the ant's not very large himself, which is virtually, there's no comparison between the 86 billion nerve cells that make up the human brain, and yet ants are considered to be one of the most intelligent of the animals in the entire animal kingdom, and certainly in the insect kingdom. And you have to remember, as we'll talk about when we talk about the zombie maker, I believe that one's next month, how those wasp, which is the zombie maker, it's a wasp, how she knows what exactly she's to do, it just staggers the imagination. But when you imagine what brain, the size of their brains, like the ants, you wonder how are they capable? And they would not have been capable had God not designed them with those abilities to begin with. This is not information, and especially with the zombie maker, it's an impossibility for those creatures to know this without God pre-programming their brain. We'll go to Travis. You know, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't program something, it's not going to come out of, well, the brain is simply that type of a thing. We can learn some things, but there's things that have to be pre-programmed, and certainly the intelligence, the information necessary that ants have to have, or any of the insects, as we could talk about honeybees. You could just go on and on and on and on. And so certainly the ants are very intelligent. Well, the anthill, the formicary, you can see that obviously they're very complex. They create different. Now remember, if these ants can't talk to one another, who knows how to set this organization up? The queen doesn't. Her only job is to lay eggs. She gets pregnant and then she lays eggs for the rest of her life. And so she's not the one that's saying, okay, go over here and dig a chamber at this location. You go over here and dig a chamber at this location. That's not how it works. And yet they make extremely complex structures. This is a cast of an anthill. They poured some molten material down, and you can see the chambers and the interconnected passageways. And we have anthills here in Barber County that will get 2 and 3 feet tall. And if you go up and start kicking them open, you find and of course the ants are all coming out to defend their nest, to defend the formicary. But certainly the architecture, the complexity that these ants have to be able to produce these kinds of structures. Again, just by accident, if you're an evolutionist, or of course God designed them with that ability, and knowing how that was going to occur, or how it would need to occur. Well, if we continue with Solomon's statement about the ants, of course by the inspiration of God in verse 7 and 8, which having no overseer or ruler, again, the ants don't have a head ant, okay, a president ant, a king ant, an emperor ant who tells them, this is what needs done. No, they all just know how to do it, and yet they start off with one single queen and one male worker who fertilizes her, and then the babies are born, and they then know how to do all the stuff that they do. Provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. This statement by Solomon for many years was considered, just flat out wrong. The people who did not believe the Bible did not believe that there is any such thing as ants harvesting their food, ants finding a way to gather food. And so the Bible just doesn't know, if God inspired Solomon to write that, surely he would have known that they're just gatherers. They just go out and they just pick up stuff and carry it back. Wrong, how wrong they were. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 25, the other verse that really deals with, the only other verse in the Bible that talks about ants. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their meat in the summer. Ants are not just gatherers. They just don't go out, find the dead animal, which they do in some cases. They cut it apart, take it back to the nest, and that's what they eat. That's how they depend on, that's what they depend on for their food. That's not the case in any stretch of the imagination, as we have now come to find out that ants are extraordinarily capable farmers. They will put, and I'm not much of a farmer, I admit it, Okay, I've already planted part of my garden in my hotbed, and the bees are out and things like that. But I've got nothing on the ants. All right? They are much more capable of growing their own food and having the harvest ready for the time when food may not be available. This is a diagram of a leaf cutter ant nest. Leaf cutter ants, as you can see, they go out, they send workers out, or workers go out. We're not sure, again, who, how, Okay, everybody in this section, you're going to go out and you're going to cut off pieces of leaves. Everybody in this section is going to tend the garden. That's not how it works. They just know, because they have been created, designed with that information in them, who's supposed to do what. Otherwise, you'd have them all out there gathering leaves, or you'd have them all in the nest taking care of the fungus that they grow. And so what happens? They go out, they collect the leaves, they bring it back, they chew them up. Other workers chew them up, and they start a garden on which fungus grows. There's a fungus among us. We've all seen fungus growing in something maybe we left in the back of the refrigerator too long, and on the top there'll be mold and fungus, okay? We all been there, done that, okay? I have to watch sometimes. I'll start to eat something. Wait a minute, maybe I should be, the little dots of something. I do that occasionally with bread. Notice that, but they harvest. They literally tend their garden of fungus. They then feed on the fungus during the winter. That's their food source. But in order to have the fungus available, they go out, they get the leaves, they bring them back, they're chewed up, and then the leaves are spread out so that the fungus will start growing in it, and then they can eat the fungus for, when in the harvest, so they're growing their own food. Well, that's a pretty good trick. Well, this one's one better. There are ants that use aphids. Now, those of you who are grow roses, you might know that aphids, a little tiny insect that get on the stems of your roses, and they're juice suckers. And if you get too many aphids on a flower plant, it will kill the plant. They'll suck all the juice out of it and die. Ants, several species of ants, have been designed by God to cultivate aphids. They grow their own aphids. They go out, they collect the ants, they take it back to their nest, the formicary, and they take care of them. They tend them like we would our cows maybe, our chickens, our whatever, sheep, whatever. Animals that we will then use for food. Well, and they will take the aphids in and out of the nest. They'll take them out and they'll put them on a plant, because what does the aphid need? Just like the cow, it's got to be turned down into the pasture, right? You've got to pasture it, you've got to let it go out and eat, and then you harvest the milk, and you have a food source. That's exactly what the ants do. They farm those aphids just like we farm cattle and sheep and chickens. All right? Now, can you imagine? How does this ant know it's supposed to take this aphid out and let it suck the juices of a plant, and then at night it's going to do what? It's going to bring it back into the pen. Bring it back into the nest. Got to take care of it. You don't want something eating your food supply. They did eat the secretions of the aphids, and that's what they use for their food. And so aphid farmers in the ants certainly have disproved the evolutionists that said, oh no, ants don't do that. Ants are simply gatherers. Well, there's a process, physical structure in ants. Ants are capable of taking food and feeding another ant with it. For example, the queen stays in her chamber with her workers that take care of her as she lays eggs. There are workers that are to take those eggs, to the nursery where they're taken care of and tended until they hatch and grow up. Well, the queen has got to have a food source. Ants have almost all, well, I can't say that, I'm not sure. But I can say that probably 99% of the ants have two stomachs. One is to feed itself, and then it has a social stomach to feed others. This process, known as photolaxis, enables ants to distribute nutrients throughout the colony. And so what we have is, in an ant, you've got this stomach back here on the top in the castor, which is the abdomen of the ant. The red one, that's the social stomach. And that's the one that it will use that it can feed other workers. Then it's got its own stomach that it will use for its own nutrition. And so it can store food in the social stomach and take it back and then use that to feed the queen, or use that to feed the workers that are not going out into the field and finding the food that's available. And so certainly this idea of being designed with two stomachs. Imagine the millions and millions and millions of years of accidental, well, we got one stomach and it's a social stomach. Well, that's not going to help me. How they would happen to develop these two stomachs, the two stomachs had to be present at the beginning, right at the very start of the social life of the insects, of the ants, would have to have those social stomachs. God created it that way. God knew how these ants were going to survive and what they would need to do to the physical structures that they would need to pull that off. Well, using that social stomach, certain groups of ants, called honey ants, have special members of their colony called repletes. And repletes are fed nectar that fill their social stomach, which is out here in the castor, the abdomen of the ant, and that is full of nectar. That is full of almost honey. That's why they're called honey ants. And the idea that different repletes are fed different, it's like a grocery store. They have one group of ants that are repletes that are fed one type of food. This is the dairy section. And they have another type of ant that's fed with another type of food, and that's the, protein section. I'm just trying to come up with something here, but, and then whenever the ants in the nest, in the formicary, need to be fed, well, they may have different needs, and so they will decide which type of replete, which type of food supply they want to eat. And of course, humans, if you're out on one of these jungle survival, I know a few military guys that have had to go out for a week and survive without anything other than their training. We don't have any honey ants in the United States that I'm aware of, but if you were able to find those, your cave, you can take those and eat those. And my understanding is that the contents of their stomach is, their social stomach is basically sugar. It's like having honey. And so we certainly know the beneficial values of that. So certainly, when we look at, we got to hurry, folks. Well, then this is a whole lesson by itself. I could take 45 minutes. Ants have a symbiotic relationship with plants. This one just staggers the imagination to imagine a tree, big tree, and a colony of ants who live in the tree. The tree actually grows special chambers on its limbs for the ants. The ants then live there and eat some of the plant secretions that the tree produces. Some of the nectar, like we eat, Jeff, maple syrup. We tap sugar maple trees, and we get the sap, we boil it down, we get maple syrup. Well, that's what the ants do. Now, symbiotic relationship means that you have two organisms that live in close contact with each other, and if it's mutualism, which this is, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I gotta avoid this science stuff, folks. Way too much material, way too much information. But the tree and the ant take care of one another. The tree provides food and housing. The ant, well, what is an ant going to do for a tree? Well, if you were to walk up, and one of the trees is a mimosa tree in Africa, if you were to walk up to that tree, start picking leaves off of it, there are going to be ants swarming from all limbs out to where you're standing there. They'll be swarming down the trunk, and they will find you. And they will crawl up your legs, and they will bite you until you decide this just isn't worth it. Or if it's a deer or a gazelle or any kind of animal, they protect the tree just like it was their tree. All right? They do, it is their tree, it's their home, it's their housing, and it's their food supply. There's only 2 days. 2 days out of the year when the ants slack off and don't do their job. 2 days that they just say, I ain't working today, folks, it's just not worth it. The only problem is, well, it's not a problem other than the tree, during those 2 to 3 days, needs to have other insects, other things come to the tree, like bees, like other pollinators. And if the ants are doing their job right, and a bee comes up to the flower of this tree and tries to pollinate it, tries to get to the flower to get nectar and then take the pollen somewhere else, the ants would attack it and drive it off. The only time the ants do not carry out their function, they're part of the symbiotic relationship with this mimosa tree, is during the time when fertilization of the flowers needs to be done. How? Well, explain it. How does the ant know when that's going to happen? How does, then how does the ant and the tree talk to one another? How do they work this out in the beginning? Well, obviously very difficult. We need to move. All right. Ants, the structure of the ant, the foot of an ant, engineered for maximum functionality. Ants can form living bridges. They interlock those. Look at all the hooks and the hairs and spines and thick and thin spines. Well, they use those, of course, then to be able to form living bridges. Ants are their exoskeleton, that's the outer part of their bodies. They are hydrophobic. We know what a phobia is, something we're scared of. Okay, hydro, water. Being scared of water. Now, that doesn't mean they're scared of water. That means that they repel water. Their skin literally repels water. In a viscoelastic, this is called viscoelastic behavior, because the ants' bodies, they can act like a liquid and a solid. This is the kind of stuff that just freaks me out whenever you stop and think about that if you had a tube filled with ants here and they wanted to move over here, they can literally flow out in one part, act like a liquid, and then as they decide they want to crawl back up, they can act as a solid. They are capable of understanding what they need, figuring it out with, remember, only 250,000 brain cells. They would have, this kind of stuff just is wow. Well, then you have ants that use those interlocking legs and are capable of forming floating mats. These are fire ants down in the southern part of the United States, and fire ants are known to survive for months during floods because they will link themselves together into a floating mass, and because, remember, their bodies, their exoskeletons are hydrophobic, the water doesn't soak into them, and so the ants on the outside will keep their backs to the water, and ants and most insects breathe through their legs. Sorry, you thought they breathed through their nose. They breathe through their legs. All right, called spiracles, and that's another 30-minute lesson. All right, and so the ants are capable. All those ants survive that, not just the ones on top. All of them survive. All of them are getting the oxygen they need. All of them are getting rid of the carbon dioxide, and they're capable of forming these floating rafts to survive floods, and that's what makes the fire ant in particular such a formidable problem, especially if they're on your property, because fire ants aren't known to be real fun if you get in the middle of a nest. Well, the longest, ants are among some of the longest living insects. Some bugs may only live days or hours. Queens of one particular species can survive up to 30 years. Can you imagine laying eggs for 30 years? It just is, there's estimated to be 20 quadrillion. I don't know how many that is, John. You can handle the math on that one. Get us $20 quadrillion, John. All right, there you go. All right, and so the number of ants are huge, and of course the characteristics. Well, there are over 12,000 species of ants. The bullet ant, this one up here, is considered to have the most painful bite in the world. And if you know anything, if you've ever watched National Geographic in South America, a rite of passage by young men, Luke and Lake, is to put a set of gloves on your hands that have bullet ants attached to the inside, so that when you stick your hands in, the bullet ants bite you. And there are thousands of these ants, or hundreds of these ants in there, and you have to leave the gloves on for like 20 minutes to prove you're a man. And when they take the gloves off, their hands are just huge red welts. And it must be extraordinarily painful. Soldier ants use their head. God has designed these ants with a round head, and you can see it here. They use that. This type of ant will make holes in logs, and they will create the size of the hole for entrances and exits, just the size of that circular thing on their head, and they will use that to plug the hole. The workers, whatever, other types of ants that may be trying to kill them and eat them, use them for prey. And so it's just, the shape of their head is just exactly matched to the shape of the hole, or their hole is matched to the shape of their head. Now, I don't know whether somebody's out there with a little tape measure. Okay, guys, we need to make the hole just this big. No, that doesn't work. All right, well, there are over 400 different receptors for the sense of smell and taste in ants. This is more than dogs. This is more than honeybees. This is more than virtually any kind of animal. And why is that important? Well, the sense of smell is exceptionally important. Remember I said many of the ants are blind, don't have eyes. And they use pheromones as chemical communications. They use this this is part of how they find their food sources. And by leaving these pheromones, and then finally the ants will, once they found a food source, the workers will come back to the formicary, the nest, and then the ants will always take the shortest. I don't know how they know what the shortest route to get to the food, but they do that on the basis of those pheromones, so that ability to smell. And that ability to smell is really getting ready to become, I've had a CAT scan. Probably most of you have had a CAT scan. I'm one of the persons, and you can ask me after services, I'm not going to explain now, but I've had a dog scan. Norma and I both have been through a dog scan. All right? Well, in the near future, you may be going to an ant scanner. They may use an ant to diagnose your cancer. The reason why is tumor cells, cancer, release volatile organic compounds, VOCs, that some animals can sniff out. There are trained dogs now that they use to actually walk by a person, and if their body is releasing, mainly in the urine, these VOCs, these volatile organic chemicals or compounds, then the dog will identify. It takes about 6 to 8 months to train a dog to do that. It takes about 3 sessions to train an ant to do it. And so they may, in the near future, we may be going to an ant scanner. And they take this little tube of ants and they take some urine sample, and if there is VOCs, if there's these tumor chemicals, release the chemicals in that urine, the ants will identify that, and then the doctors can say, we need to do a full body scan, we need to do a CAT scan or an MRI. So cancer sniffing ants might even provide an advantage. These ants were trained to sniff out cancer. This is the Smithsonian magazine that published this article. It took 3 trials totaling about 10 minutes to get the ants to be trained to smell cancer. So in less than 30 minutes, they can take an ant with 86 billion nerve cells, 250,000 brain cells, and teach it to smell cancer in humans. Pretty neat trick. All right. Well, the Sahara ant, as we're going to have to wrap this up. Yeah, the Sahara ant is the last one. This is an ant that probably among all the ants, there's no way that evolution could bring this about. This particular species of ant lives, of course, in the Sahara Desert. It's called the silver ant because its body is covered with silver hairs, which again is partly because of the fact that it needs to reflect a lot of light. It's living in the Sahara Desert. If you don't know anything about the Sahara Desert, it's warm there. Okay, in case you hadn't noticed. Okay, I've never been there, but everything I've seen or heard or read says it gets hot in the desert, folks, especially the Sahara Desert. This is the fastest of the 12,000 known species of ants. It can run at a velocity over 1.9 miles per hour. This is an ant. It can run its own body length 108 times in a second. Now, folks, that's getting down the road. All right? I used to be able to move pretty good. You all don't move quite as fast as I used to. But nowhere near those kinds of numbers, 108 times my own body length per second. Now, they need to do that because, well, they're living in a location, they're the fastest ant, they have the longest legs, the silver comes from, they reflect. 128.5 degrees is the average temperature in the Sahara Desert where they live. In order to not fry when they go out to forage, you don't stand on sand that's hot very long without cooking. All right? And so God has designed them with that extremely fast speed in order to get out to their food source, get the food source, get it back. They can only be out during the hottest part of the day for about 10 minutes before they die. It's really interesting, the Sahara silver ant, before they go out, there generally is a rock near their entrance to their hive or their nest. And the workers will go out and they'll get up on top of that rock and they'll scan it around. They'll scan around to look. What they believe is going on, and again, it's hard to get inside of the brain of an ant, but what they believe is going on, that it is looking for the landmark, so that when it goes out looking for food, it can know exactly where it needs to run back to get back underground where it's cool. All right? And so that ability to navigate, that ability to cover, 109 times their own length in a second. Again, that orientation ability, the Sahara silver ant is an incredible animal. God has designed them with what's called heat shock proteins, HSPs. These are proteins in their body that prevent them from frying, their blood from boiling. Now stop and think about it. We know of animals and that can live in conditions. There's an ice worm. Below 32 degrees, this ant survives. Or this worm survives. Okay? It does that because it has certain proteins that keeps its blood from turning into ice. Okay? Well, in the case of the Sahara silver ant, it does the opposite. God has created a protein that will keep its blood from boiling so that it can survive in this very harsh environment without dying. So the critical thermal maximum temperature is 128.5 degrees. Wyatt and I were up in the attic Friday of last week. We went and we did that so we could work on the fans while it's cool. Because you get up there when it's hot, and I got news for you. One trip across the top of this building in that attic will cook you. I mean, it gets hot up there, but not anywhere near 128 degrees. Otherwise, our heat detectors would be going off, and we'd have the fire department and everybody else in here. God's design of these creatures, of the ant, certainly, of the silver ant, certainly is one that, again, would be very difficult to explain were it not for the designer. Well, we could go literally on and on and on. I had to find some way to cut this down to something that was manageable. Well, certainly God has designed the ants for each type of ant where they need to live in order to survive and in order to do the things that they need to do. Their abilities to smell, their abilities to capture prey as farmers, as participants in symbiotic relationships, in the high heat proteins God created in the silver ant, Sahara silver ant. These things operate according to God's plan. God knew exactly what each would need and then planned it accordingly. God has designed for our salvation a plan as well, and that plan, of course, and while this lesson hasn't been about the gospel plan of salvation, it is the same God that created each one of these 12,000 species of ants that created this plan of salvation that humans need to respond to, need to follow God's plan in order to be pleasing to Him. To hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized, and then be a worker for Him, as the lesson this morning talked about. The not being a sluggard, and certainly we can look at ants and realize that certainly they are not in any way can be considered sluggards. They respond, they do what God told them to do, the way God told them to do it. This evening, again, we could go on a long time with ants, but appreciate your attention. If there's anything we can do to help with your spiritual condition, your salvation, if you've never become a Christian, you need to follow that plan that God has created. If you've done that, you've become weak, you've fallen away, and maybe something, when we look at the world around us and the things that God has created, has made you realize, I need to come back to the Creator. I need to come back to the one who designed the gospel plan of salvation. However we might help you, we'd encourage you to come while we stand and sing the song collectively.